Literacy with me, Miss Matt Mullen, and with Vivian. Say hello, Vivian. She's got a little t-shirt on because she's cold. Welcome to Matt Literacy. Welcome to week 4 of Macma Literacy. It's unit 1, so we're discussing academic vocabulary, things that will help you with the school, Vivian. It's time you went to school. You're getting too old to be at home all the time. So, oh, she's running away. I don't blame her. Today we're discussing words that will help you in biology. It's all things sciencey. And of course that makes complete sense because last week we were talking about art and I couldn't stop talking about science. I was talking about cone cells. I just couldn't stop. Well, today I get to talk about science. Last week we talked about cone cells. We talked about all things that kept ending up sciencey. And we did actually eventually get round to talking about the terminology that we use in art. We talked about trichromatic, monochromatic, dichromatic, tertiary colours, tints and shades. Now, as I kept going on about cells last week, why was I going on about cells so much? Cone cells this, cone cells that. Well, we're starting today with that word, cell. What is a cell? Where does the word come from? What different things are called cells? That's how we're starting. Right. What things are called cells? Well, cells make me think of prisons and cells in the body. Or, of course, cells in plants. Cells, life. Well, we're going to discuss that now. So, as it turns out, both those things come from the same place. The Latin word cella means storeroom or chamber. So it's a room, basically. As language progressed, that word more commonly came to be used when discussing the room that a monk lives in. Now, a monk is a person who dedicates their life to their religion. Originally, this term talked about men or women, but as time went on, it's more nuns used for women. It's not just Christianity. Monks exist in all different kinds of religions, like Buddhist monks. Monks spend their time alone. Sometimes they live in groups as well. They tend to spend their time praying or reflecting or studying or dedicating their lives to helping others. So as you can imagine from that kind of lifestyle, they don't tend to opt for opulence and decadence and fancy things. The rooms that they stay in tend to be very bare, very simple, because that reflects the kind of life that they want to have, reflecting and not distracted by material goods like fake hair. Monks have these very plain, bare rooms. That was a cell. Now, you can see from that how we get prison cells today, because it comes from this idea of this bare room, this room without much comfort or like, fun things in, sort of thing. Just a bare, simple room is a cell, though originally it just meant a room. Now, along comes Robert Hooke. Hooke loves microscopes. It's 1655. He can't get enough of them. He's putting insects under microscopes. He's putting pins under microscopes. He's putting everything under them. It's like when you've just got a new Christmas present and you're like, yes, I will use the microscope for everything. That is how Hooke feels about the microscope. Now, he puts a bit of cork under the microscope. Now, cork comes from a tree originally. It's the outer layer of the cork out. But cork, like when we know it now, when something's made of cork, that's like dead. So he was looking at that, and he's looking at the little patterns that it makes. You can see the patterns that he saw here. And he's like, wow, these like little shapes, they kind of look as though it's a monk's cell. And I like to think he was like, oh, it's like there could be tiny little monks in there with their tiny little prayers, though we can't judge the size of their prayers. These tiny little monks are dedicating their whole lives to their prayers, so their prayers might be huge, bigger than my prayers would be. So I'm not judging the tiny little monks with their tiny little prayers in their tiny little cells. Anyway, I digress. He thinks that the cork looks like it's made up of tiny cells, and he starts to use the term cell for this tiny little space that he's seen. And it catches on. Though it isn't for years that they actually figure out exactly what a cell is, and the fact that they are just the building blocks of everything that is alive. Animals and plants have different kinds of cells, but they're pretty much the same. A lot about them are pretty standard. We know a lot more about cells now than Hooke did when he first recognised one, but As yet, we have no proof that they contain tiny monks making tiny prayers. Science is always changing, we don't know. What we do know about all cells is that they contain a nucleus. And that's our next word for today, nucleus. Nucleus comes from the word nuclear, which means little knot. Cute. And that then became the Latin word nucleus, just like we use it now, nucleus. But then it meant kernel. You probably know a kernel from corn kernels. They're the ones that you pop to make popcorn. So, kernel. Now, when people were looking through microscopes again, and this time they could see the nucleus, they were like, looks like a little kernel. Let's call it nucleus, because they love to use the Latin name for things. They couldn't have just said kernel. It is what it is. I like the word nucleus. Nucleus is probably a better word. Nothing wrong with kernel, but it would have been confusing with popcorn. Right. So they realised that every single cell has this little shape in it. Whether it's a plant cell or a human cell, this little shape is there, sitting in the middle. So what is the nucleus? The nucleus is like the brain, or maybe like the manager. So if the cell is a shop, the nucleus is the manager. If a cell is a body, the nucleus is the brain. Essentially, the nucleus tells everybody what to do. And this is really important because every single cell has its own purpose, its own function. The nucleus also holds DNA, which is like a little identity stamp for exactly who we are. My DNA is different from everyone else's DNA in the world. And most of your DNA can be found in the nucleus of every single cell in your body. When a new human is born, they get a mix of the DNA from their mum's nucleus and their dad's nucleus to create fancy new DNA that's totally different from anybody else's DNA. Woo! Individual creates a new identity stamp. We have the cells, the building blocks for every single living thing. So tiny that usually you need a microscope to see them, though not always. There are certain cells that are just strangely large and we could actually make out just with a human eye. The female human egg cell is one of them. And also there are actually organisms that exist just from one cell. Just this one cell is just like a whole living organism. It's amazing. Now, the human body has upwards of 37 trillion cells. 37 trillion. There's no way that my brain can even function to comprehend that much. Like, take a moment to look at yourself. You are only cells. You are a collection of cells. Cells are everywhere. Cells are everything. And each of those tiny little cells in every single part of you, each of them is being told what to do by a tiny little nucleus that's being very assertive and being like, you need to be going about doing this. Maybe the nucleus is the monk in the cell. Or maybe the nucleus is a prisoner in a cell. Anyway, this brings us to our next piece of vocabulary, mitochondria. This is something else that can be found in a cell as well as a monk. Not a monk. Stop thinking about monks. The word mitochondria is plural. It describes more than one of these. Really, we would say mitochondrion for one of them. But they're so tiny, it's rare that you ever... They like to hang out with their friends. They're a squad. Mitochondria comes from Greek words. We're seeing a pattern here. There's usually a lot of Greek or Latin. Mito means thread. Chondria means grain. So again, we're getting this idea of like kernels and stuff. The scientists really like the idea that inside the human body as well as plants, things were like seeds growing. It's nice. Now, mitochondria is so important because it makes the energy in a cell. So it couldn't function and do anything. No matter how assertive our nucleus is telling the cell what to do, it couldn't do anything without any energy. So the mitochondria creates the energy. And it also has some of its own DNA as well. I find this particularly interesting, right? Because as I said, the nucleus, you get a mix of your mum's DNA and your dad's DNA, and that's from their nucleus. But every single person gets mitochondrial DNA from their mum and only their mum. So you get this special kind of DNA that's passed down from mother to child, mother to child, mother to child. And when you get like a DNA test, you know, you can get ones to find out like who your second cousin is. That would be using the DNA from your nucleus because it's got your immediate family's information. But if you want to find out, like, was I from Africa or was I from Peru thousands of years ago. Maybe I'm related to Queen Cleopatra. You want to look at the long-standing. They're not going to be able to tell you if you're related to Queen Cleopatra. But you can find out if part of your heritage is Egyptian by them looking at your mitochondrial DNA, because it doesn't change. Anyway, it's called mitochondria, thread grain, because it looks kind of like that. It's kind of like long and thin, like a thread or a grain. My literacy YouTubes keep turning into science lessons. And we're back to words. I'm talking about words. I'm a literacy person. I just find mitochondrial DNA really interesting. Nucleus DNA? Is that what you call it? Nucleus DNA? DNA from the nucleus makes us an individual person. Mitochondrial DNA connects us to our ancestry. It's lovely. Anyway, final word. The one that links all of these. Organism. Now, an organism is any living thing. So in order for something to be classed as a living thing, it has to have all the properties of a living thing. Stuff like being able to reproduce, being able to grow. You'll find out the rest of these in science. When I was in school, we used to call us Mrs. Gren to remember them. But that might be really old-fashioned now. Yeah, I don't know if you use Mrs. Gren anymore, so I'm not gonna try and teach you science, right? I'm teaching you about the words. Now, the word organism comes from the ancient Greek word organismos, and that's the same place that the word organize comes from. So organism, organ, organize, they're all connected. And this really speaks to how interested scientists were when they were discovering all of these things, in the fact that nature just seemed so very well organized. They thought that all living things, all organisms, seemed to be able to organize themselves very well into sets. And so they were organisms, part of an organization. So they are our 4 words for today. Cell, nucleus, mitochondria, and organism. Now, can you match each of these to their definitions? Excellent. And can you spell cell? Can you spell nucleus? Can you spell mitochondria, remembering that mitochondria is the plural, mitochondrion would be the singular, so I want you to spell the plural mitochondria. And can you spell organism? And here we go. What do you think? How did you do? Mitochondria is a difficult one, isn't it? What about organism? Did you get that? I hope you got cell. Let's try again. Cell. Nucleus. Got those last letters. Have you got them right? Nucleus. Mitochondria. Organism. Now check again with the mitochondria. Did you get the CH in it? That's the tricky bit, I think. Nucleus. Did you get the EU? Organism. Avoid any Zs. One more time. Cell. Bit faster this time. Nucleus. Mitochondria. Organism.
Amazing. Go back if you feel stuck. Now, hopefully you should have a notebook or something to be keeping all of these words in. If so, copy out beautiful definitions so that you know all of these things when you go into your biology class and you can just be like, mitochondrial DNA? Who doesn't know that from literacy? Anyway, I'm gonna go and prep a video about English words for next week because I feel like I'm forgetting my own subject. So I will see you next week when we will discuss words that you all need in English. On my face.
Thank you for joining us for another week on Macmo Literacy. If you enjoy starting with a word and then ending up in a rambling journey to who knows where, then I suggest that you hit like and subscribe. Also, if you just want to be a pal, like and subscribe. See you next week.